Good Sunday morning to you. Hope you're having a nice one wherever you are. Welcome to the Shakti Report, early morning Sunday. I wanted to take some time. I know I'm a week late on the Veterans Day, but you know how life goes. Sometimes we have to put things off. But I wanted to take a moment and a Shakti report here to draw our attention to how valuable the veterans are and what they've been doing really in our country. The picture on this event was a picture of the veterans deploying to Standing Rock. And that was a really big deal last year, a year ago, this time, almost to the day-ish. I think it was a little earlier, or maybe it was in December, early December. The veterans organized and all deployed together to go to Standing Rock and stand in solidarity with the Sioux tribe and all nations there that were standing in solidarity with them. So this got a lot of media attention. You know, as soon as the veterans went, the media kind of could no longer fully ignore the situation. Also, the media tried to twist that whole situation and make it as if it were like a riot or anything but a peaceable assembly on the Sioux tribe's land. So when the veterans came out, that was a big deal. They don't go and deploy for no reason, always for good reason. And I just am so thankful that they are organizing and they're paying attention. And I think we all, as we move on this journey of unifying our country and really educating ourselves to contribute to that in a positive way, I think that we need to also remember that the veterans are our allies and they understand a lot more about what's going on than a lot of us do. And furthermore, even if you understand a lot about what's going on, they have a perspective that is unique and has a lot of wisdom and nuance that I think helps us on our journey and helps remind us, that these things are important. And so I just wanted to take a moment to introduce you to one such veteran whom, he works for RT. Those of you who don't know, all this stuff on censorship for Twitter and Facebook and Russia investing in them. That translates to RT, which stands for Russian Times, which is owned by the Kremlin, advertised their news on Facebook and Twitter, just like lots of other news outlets advertised their news on Facebook and Twitter from other countries, including the BBC. RT essentially is the equivalent of the BBC in Russia. So, and really the main point is here, we either have freedom of speech or we don't. And in that whole debacle, they never said RT actually said false news. What it says is that RT presented divisive news that divided the people. And I don't know if any of you were paying attention, but there wasn't anything on the news that wasn't divisive a year ago. So, that was kind of part of the game we were in the midst of during that election. It was the most divisive election we've ever seen, with the poorest voter turnout for a presidential election in a very long time. So, getting back to the point, the veterans know what's up and they are using their voice. And this particular veteran works for RT because the other news sources won't let people like this have the freedom of speech. And this is the irony of our times. And those of you who haven't read George Orwell's 1984, you must read it. I need to reread it. I started it, but I didn't go all the way. But I did recently read for the first time Brave New World. Also want to get to Brave New World Revisited. However, these things help us put things, the reason stories help is because it helps us put things in more of a broad context, seeing the larger picture. And with their very blunt metaphors, we are able to somehow awaken something inside ourselves like, oh shit, that's happening. That's a way more blunt, maybe, far off expression of it, but I see that, And that's the interesting thing about 1984. When I first read it in high school, I did not see any of that coming true. And it's only since it started coming true that I started thinking back on that book and being like, what? Like, because I was so, at 16 or 17, however old I was when I read it, our country didn't look like that yet. It was beginning to, but it was still so hidden from, the youth, especially, me and where I grew up in upstate New York and stuff. We just, maybe if I were in New York City, I might be able to see, that clearer. So it also depends on, where you are in life experience and things. But, yeah, I think we could all agree that in the past 20 years that we can see way more of George Orwell's predictions and themes in our reality here. So do reread that, because literature really helps us get better ideas, accept things without taking them personally. And it helps us not have this sense of wrong, but instead this sense of like opening our eyes, like, whoa, the sense of wrong tends to close us down from, exploring any deeper. So that's it for me. I just want to say I really value the veterans. I value how they're organizing and deploying, and I think we need to encourage that, and I think we need to find ways to include them in whatever we're doing, perhaps searching for some veteran organizations on Facebook that you can like or follow and share things of. I'm also going to put a link for a petition to help veterans get the funding they need for medical care and things. That petition is on change.org. I'll put that in the resources at the end of this video, along with the link to this video I'm about to show you. So I hope you have a great Sunday morning. I will be on later this afternoon with another Shakti report, and tomorrow at 5 p.m. Pacific time, the lovely Julia Freifeld will be on with me. Please do tune in and share that event.
Welcome to the World According to Jesse. I'm your host, Brigida Santos. Veterans Day was originally known as Armistice Day. It was first celebrated on November 11th, 1919, exactly 1 year after World War I had come to an end. The truce, or armistice, between the Allied forces and Germany marked the end of a conflict that over 16 million people died in. In 1938, Congress declared the date a national holiday and dedicated it to the cause of world peace. The act legalizing the holiday states the 11th of November, 1918, marks the end of the most destructive, sanguinary, and far-reaching war in human history, and the resumption of peace with other nations. The recurring anniversary shall be commemorated with exercises aimed at perpetuating world peace and goodwill and mutual understanding between nations. The document reflected what many believed at the time, that World War I had been the war to end all wars. But by 1939, the United States was engaged in a second world war. After a series of other armed conflicts, including the Korean War, Congress amended the act and replaced the word armistice with the word veterans. The holiday for many is an empty gesture. It does not help soldiers with the challenges they face back at home. Re-entering civilian life for many means addressing physical, mental, and financial hardships resulting from military service. The federal agency tasked with helping them has been caught in a string of scandals, leaving them with nowhere to go. Here is how our government dishonors its veterans. Governor, when you got back from Vietnam, what kind of issues were veterans facing at the time, and did the U.S. government address them?
Well, at the end of the Vietnam War, we faced many issues, not only physical ones like Agent Orange, defoliant used in Vietnam, that's chemical warfare that caused cancer, but we also faced the fact that our politicians and our mainstream media, or as the president likes to refer to them, the fake media, well, they managed to convince the American people that somehow we, the Vietnam veterans, were responsible for the Vietnam War and that we were responsible for us losing that war. I remember most of us Vietnam vets, when we got home, we didn't come home to celebrations. We didn't have the National Football League honoring us on TV. In fact, most veterans, myself included back then, we hid the fact that we were veterans for probably a decade or up to 10 years before we even allowed the public to know you were a veteran, because we were not liked when we got home. You had had the My Lai massacre, this unfortunate thing that took place in Vietnam, and the whole country was really against the veteran at the end of the Vietnam War. And then, of course, veterans that went to the VA hospitals faced a lot of stuff. Agent Orange wasn't acknowledged. Mental problems, post-traumatic stress, oh, that's not real. And you had all of this stuff that the Vietnam veteran had to face. But I think the thing that mostly bothered us was the fact we were never thanked for serving our country. In fact, the opposite took place. As I said earlier, we were blamed instead of thanked. The politicians and the media managed to make the switch on us and put the blame on us from where it really belonged. Because always remember this, war happens when politicians fail. Let me repeat that. War is the end result when you have failed politicians.
Amen, brother.
All right, Governor, your generation was the last to see a military draft. How did men feel at the time about potentially being sent to their deaths?
Well, it was interesting. The military draft was so unfair because if you were a rich kid from the suburbs and your family had money, you could go to college and you could get deferments, much like old 5 deferment Dick Cheney got. He didn't have to serve because he got 5 deferments out of the war and said he had more important things to do. Well, that's the way it was all set up. If you look at who got drafted, it was people of color, the working poor, and the middle class. They were the ones couldn't afford to hide in college, couldn't afford to get doctors to tell them they had bone spurs on their feet, and all the rest of this other stuff. As I've said before, my 6 years in the military, I never met one millionaire. I never met anyone who was rich. It's the poor people, and that's what the draft did. The draft drafted you and sent you off to war whether you wanted to go or not. And that's why you had people protesting, I think, because little Johnny, who didn't want to go to war, ends up being made to go to war, and then a year later he comes home in a body bag in the neighborhood. Well, that has an impact.
So that leads me to my next question. Now, many people protested during the Vietnam War, as you said, because they were getting drafted against their will. But right now, why are we not seeing large anti-war demonstrations today, considering how many wars the United States is actually engaged in?
Because they got rid of the draft and started a professional military, Brigida. So now the public thought is, well, these guys, wait a minute, they all volunteered. So wherever we send them, it's okay. There's no reason to protest because they all volunteered. Well, that's completely wrong. They volunteered to serve their country. They didn't necessarily volunteer to get sent all around the world engaging in wars that have nothing to do with the United States and more to do with corporations rather than countries. So I think that's one of the big reasons you don't see the rebellion, plus the musicians. I'd like to know where the musicians are today. You have a few. Tom Morello, Rage Against the Machine is one. But back in our day, Crosby, Stills, Nash, 4 dead in Ohio when they killed the students at Kent State. You had the musicians rising up on behalf of the people, and I think it was because there was a draft, and people somehow think the professional military is fair. It's not. Nobody joins the military today unless it's to boost your standing. Poor people are still the only ones joining. Middle-class kids, through patriotism, are still the only ones joining. You don't see rich kids joining and going into the military, although I will say in Vietnam there was an exception. My good friend Oliver Stone, he came from wealth, but he joined and volunteered and is a decorated Purple Heart wounded Vietnam veteran. So when they try to criticize Oliver Stone, he got wounded and was a veteran who came from a rich family.
The U.S. military sprayed Agent Orange over the forests of Vietnam, which provided cover for enemy troops. Now, the herbicide was manufactured by Dow Chemical and Monsanto, and it contained dioxin, which is one of the most toxic chemicals on the planet. Nearly 3 million Vietnamese were exposed to dioxin, as were thousands of U.S. soldiers and their allies. What are the lasting effects of Agent Orange on human health and the environment, Governor? Do you know?
It's horrible. I mean, you had veterans coming home, developing cancer, developing all these strange, call them erotic diseases. They go over there healthy, they come back. This is chemical warfare. And you sit and see the United States gripe and say, oh, chemical warfare on Assad, chemical warfare here, when we've practiced it all the time. What's napalm? Napalm's a chemical weapon, just as Agent Orange was a chemical weapon. And the sad thing is the government wouldn't acknowledge it. All these guys, much the same as the burn pits today. The same thing is happening. The government wants you to serve, and then they want you to die, disappear. We don't want to spend the money on you anymore. You were healthy when you went over there. When you came back, you're not, but that's too bad for you. It has a horrible effect on the environment, a horrible effect on anybody that came in contact with Agent Orange. And you notice the United States has never apologized for it. They've never said we were wrong in using it, even though it was a death sentence for the environment. But who cares? It's in war, right? All is fair, according to certain people.
This year, California Rep. Barbara Lee has introduced the Victims of Agent Orange Relief Act. Now, what it would do is assist in cleaning up dioxin in Vietnam, as well as provide health support for those who have been affected. But do you think this bill is going to be passed? What do you think about it?
Well, first of all, isn't it about 40 years too late? How many people have already been affected and already died? See, this is exactly what I mean. They don't do it immediately after the war when they could actually help people who were affected. They wait until 40 to 50 years later where nobody's alive much anymore to even be affected by it. Do I think it will pass? Only if it doesn't cost the government very much money. Then it might. If it's going to cost the government a lot of money, oh, you won't see it pass then. See, they only give lip service to veterans. They give you parades. They have the National Football League honor you. They do all this stuff, feel-good stuff. But when it comes down to having to spend money for the people you sent off to defend your country, that gets lost in the shuffle and it appears like this 40 years after the fact. Give me a break. You think it would have taken that long if Dick Cheney would have got affected by it?
Okay, so what do you think is the main lesson of the Vietnam War for the United States and also for you personally?
Well, to me, the main lesson is, and we haven't learned that lesson, it's don't blame the warriors for the war. Blame the politician who sends the warriors to war. That's the lesson to learn from Vietnam. Have we learned it? Not really. We do honor the veterans, but Vietnam had no gold star families, when the result of Vietnam should have been 58,000 gold star families. But they didn't have that back then. But today, it's really no different. Veterans aren't being helped at the VA. Veterans aren't being helped who really need it. All they do is give you a show. They pretend that they love the veterans. They pretend and give you Veterans Day and give you the National Football League and the basketball and all that, where we honor the veterans. Well, people forget they're getting paid to do that by our own government. It was right in the defense bill, and John McCain found it. So while all this Colin Kaepernick crap was going on, the real story was the fact these owners are getting paid by our government to honor the veterans who provide them with their very freedom to make their billions of dollars.
So what else can be done to help the veterans who've served this country? You know personally, what do veterans need when they come home?
What they need is the Veterans Hospital. What they need is for people to put real money onto the table and real results to happen. Don't give us this high school rah-rah cheerleaders, and don't give us all this nonsense of, oh, welcome home, oh, thank you for your service and all this stuff. Yeah, that's nice. But where they really need to help is put the money on the table. See, our country wants you to go fight for them, but then when you're done, you're yesterday's garbage. You're old news. Get on down the road. We got other fish to fry now.
Just like every industry.
Why will they spend all this money on a new aircraft carrier, the USS Gerald Ford, $1 billion? I think that money would have been better spent to take care of the veterans who have already fought for this country and who are in need of help now. But our government doesn't care about that. Just take a look at the VA hospitals and how horrible they are today.
All right, it's time for a quick break. When we return, former U.S. Marine Joseph Hickman joins the governor to discuss what millennials are calling the Agent Orange of their generation.
Commercials! Oh yeah, these guys
More digestible. That's what we do every week. Hard-hitting, radical comedy news like Redacted Tonight is where it's at.
They look like Americans to me.
They have since been linked to illnesses and deaths of soldiers. I spoke to Joseph earlier. The world according to Jesse. Joe, you're a veteran. As one veteran to another, I served from 1969 to 1975 in the U.S. Navy Underwater Demolition SEAL Team. I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I love the movie. I just saw the movie, Deny, Delay, and Hope You Die, which is based upon your book, The Burn Pits. And when I watched it, I was glad that the tie-in happened between this and Agent Orange, because it's the same thing being repeated over again to our veterans, isn't it?
It certainly is, and I make that very clear in the book that history is just repeating itself. Agent Orange, I hope it doesn't repeat itself completely. Agent Orange, it took over 27 years for a handful of veterans to actually get help for their ailments, and right now over 100,000 veterans have complained about illnesses caused from the burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. And I sure hope it don't take them 27 years to get relief.
Joe, what inspired you to write this book? Anger?
Anger after I started interviewing all the veterans that were suffering from these horrible burn pits. It was I was speaking
Anger
to
can
a
be
veteran
channeled for good.
over the phone one day, and he started coughing, and he just hacking. And I asked him, "What's wrong?" He said, "I brought some of the burn pit back from me from Camp Taji in Iraq." I said, "Burn pit? What are you talking about?" This was right after the release of my first book, and I wrote about Guantanamo, and a lot of veterans were calling me and thanking me for writing the book, and I told them, "Well, what is this burn pit? What are you talking about?" And he said, "Well, they had open air burn pits we burned our trash in, and a lot of soldiers are sick from this, and you really ought to look into it." So I did. I called a couple of his friends that said they were sick from the burn pits, and it was a domino effect. I interviewed over 1,000 veterans writing the book, and they were all sick, and many of them dying, and many have died since I've written the book that were exposed to these toxic burn pits in Iraq and Afghanistan. Camp Taji was a former Iraqi base where they manufactured chemical weapons. When they constructed the burn pit, they constructed the burn pits directly on top of where the manufacturing was being done. And they didn't do any soil samples before the construction, and the ground could have been contaminated. I had one Halliburton employee tell me that when they did it, he knew the ground was hot, meaning it was contaminated, and he had a big concern that those contaminants would be airborne.
Why would the government do this? Why would Halliburton and KGR, or whatever the hell their initials are, all for money, right? It's all for money so that they can make more profit, correct?
It was make more profit and cutting costs. They could have put the high pressure, high heat incinerators on these bases. Instead, they decided to cut costs and put open air burn pits on these bases to expose of the trash that was being accumulated from war. And a lot of people don't realize exactly how much trash war accumulates from the bombardments, bringing things to rubble, to the soldier himself, who averages 10 pounds of trash a day. It becomes a serious issue for commanders.
Joe, what were they burning? What have you learned? What were in these pits, actually, that was burned and allowed to go into the atmosphere, where they had, as I understood it, you had troops within like 300 yards of these burn pits where they sleep there, live there, and everything. What exactly was going into these pits and being burned?
Anything and everything you can think of was being burned. It was medical waste. It was rubber tires. It was treated lumber. It was plastic, styrofoam, batteries, human carcasses, human body parts, animal carcasses. It was anything you can think of, tar paper, anything
you can
that could be burned was burned in these burn pits.
Oh,
so these pits are very large things. I mean, they're not like little campfires. They're massive burn pits that just expel all this stuff into the atmosphere. And as I understand it, there's not a lot of wind there that just hangs over the camps, and these soldiers are made to breathe it in and out all 24 hours a day.
That's exactly right. These burn pits were massive in size. Camp Taji, for example, was a 10-acre burn pit, and it burned roughly 50 tons of trash a day. Balad Air Base was even larger. These bases had massive burn pits because, as I said, the rubble and waste from war is absolutely, it's a serious issue. So yeah, they were massive in size, and they burned 24/7.
This is all under Halliburton, right? Dick Cheney's old company?
Yes, Halliburton was the contractor that was in charge of constructing the burn pits and operating the burn pits.
And how much money has Dick Cheney made off Halliburton in these wars? Because I found it astounding. They said he made $80 million in stock options.
That's correct. It was $80 million in stock options when he retired from Halliburton in 2000 as CEO. And then, when the war started, Halliburton automatically gets the no-bid contract to run and operate these burn pits. And during the war, his stock options quadrupled.
Wow. What can we do about this, Joe?
Over 100,000 people have complained and signed a petition that they have been injured by these burn pits, and no one is paying attention to it. We have to contact our senators and congressmen. Senator Tillis from North Carolina is doing great work trying to get something done, but he puts a bill out, and by the time it gets to the Senate, it looks totally different than what he put out to begin with.
Joe, we need our young people to know that this is a pattern. This isn't a one-time only thing. It seems to happen after every war we get involved with. Our young people need to know when they sign up for the U.S. military, get ready, because when you're done serving, you're just cannon fodder to them. Do you agree with that?
I do, but the amazing thing is when I talk to these veterans, they're dying on their deathbed, some of them, and they'll say they'd do it again.
Joe, thank you. We're running out of time. I want to have you on again. Will you come on again with me and we'll continue to discuss this because we've got to get this out into the United States of America. Thank you very much. The world according
to So, just to let y'all know, he's not totally my cup of tea, although he's totally won me over because I've known about him for a while now and watched him, but I can't say that, his style or presentation is really, I'm not into like biker dudes or anything like that. But yeah, he's just an amazing person. You can look him up on YouTube. That show's called The World According to Jesse. If you have cable, which I hope you don't, you can get RT stations. You can order those, and they have amazing shows. Redacted Tonight is a really funny one. So that pretty much sums up the love your veterans, and it's just good to also know that, like, as a democratic republic, and I'll also put a link to that video in the resources. I just did a video yesterday on that, but as a democratic republic, once people get into the office, our job doesn't end. It really just begins if we want to see real change, and especially now. So we'll keep discussing on how we do that, voting with our dollar and everything. And I, again, go into the resources after this video because I am also going to put a change.org petition that people are signing to help veterans get compensation for their health care. And also, I'll be looking into the burn pit thing and see if there's any petition for that out there. If I can find anything, I'll link that in the resources. But yeah, I hope you guys have a wonderful Sunday. Hope you've got some lovely fall Sunday morning yumminess going on. And love, love, love. Have a good day.